Hi there. Welcome to Engage New York, Module 4, Lesson 13. This is concept development. Now, the big idea behind this lesson, the objective is to multiply unit fractions by unit fractions. Now, a unit fraction by a unit fraction is quite easy for you at this point. So, a unit fraction is a unit, one unit of a whole. So the whole here would be 1/4, right? Times a half. Now we're going to take this idea of using the model to represent what we are doing with multiplying a unit fraction by a unit fraction. Because essentially you're taking a piece of a piece. You're putting these two models together to find a piece of a piece. So if you have a piece of a candy bar and you have to give a piece of what you have, you only have a piece, and you have to now give a piece to your brother or sister, you are ending up with something much smaller, right? So let's get started. So Jan has 4 pans of Rice Krispie treats. She sends half of the pans to school with her children. How many pans of Rice Krispie treats does Jan send to school? Well, let's just start off here. If you had 4 pans of Rice Krispie treats and you sent half of them to school, how many pans would you be sending to school? 2, right? Now, what about if you had 2 pans of Rice Krispie treats and you sent half of the pans to school? How many pans did you send to school? 1. Now, what if you only had 1 pan of Rice Krispie treats and you had to send half of those to school? How much of the pan of Rice Krispie treats did you send to school? You sent half of 1 pan, right? All right, so now let's go ahead and take the idea of a half of a half. Let's say Jan has only a half of a pan of Rice Krispie treats, and she's going to send half of the pan to school. How much does she send to school? So let's make an agreement. So you know that 1/2 of 1/2 is 1/2 times 1/2, right? So we're going to draw a model. We're going to use, it's not a tape diagram this time. It's a rectangular diagram. Okay? So this time we are going to, now our agreement, the first fraction of your problem, we're going to represent it down the side here. Okay? The second fraction is going to go along the bottom. So if we get in the habit of following that, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. So if you always take your first fraction and put it to the left of your rectangle, take your second fraction and put it at the bottom of your rectangle or the top. So what we're going to do, so when you are working with the side, you're going to cut across the side. And when you're on the bottom, you're going to cut up through the bottom of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's cut this rectangular diagram in half. And then let's shade it in. All right, now we're going to cut this in half now. So we have a half. So now we're only looking at half of the half. So now how many total pieces did we just create? We created 4 total pieces, right? But we're only counting half of the half. So this is the overlap. This is half of half. So now if you go over here and you go 1/2, let's do it this way, 1/2 times 1/2, what do you get? You get 1/4, right? So how much of this square is double shaded? 1/4 of this diagram is double shaded, right? So that's how we're going to model, represent multiplying a unit fraction by a unit fraction. We're going to just illustrate what this is. Even though this is super easy, I know you know how to do this, but it's understanding the number sense behind all of this and what a half of a half is and what that represents. What does that look like? Okay, moving on. Now, Jan has 1/3 of a pan of Rice Krispie treats, and she sends 1/2 of the treats to school with her children. What fraction of the pan does she send to school? So we are going to draw a tape diagram to illustrate this. So imagine that Jan only has 1/3 of a pan, and she still wants to send half of the treats to school. So she will be sending my question for you is, will she be sending a greater amount or a smaller amount of treats to school than she sent in the last problem? Well, she's going to send a smaller part of the whole pan because she had half a pan before. Now she only has 1/3 of a pan, and 1/3 is less than 1/2. So half of a third is less than half of a half. So 1/2 is larger than 1/3. So she will send more in the last problem than this one. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's draw this out. Okay. So what was our agreement? We're going to take our first fraction and go down the side, right? So this is essentially multiplication, right? So 1/3 times 1/2, right? So this is going to be 1/3 times 1/2. Now, very easily you can see you could quickly solve this, right? But the big idea of this lesson is, can you model and draw the tape diagram? So let's go ahead and draw that tape diagram. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in 1/3 to represent 1/3. Now I'm going to represent and divide this in half. So now I only focus on half. You only focus on the half that's already shaded. So what is shaded? What is double shaded? So I double shade half right? I'm going to double shade half of what I'm working with. I'm only working with, here's a third, and this is the area that I'm working in, 1/3. And I'm going to divide it in half, and I'm only going to shade in half. So what part is represented here? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts now, right? So I just represented and showed and modeled one is double shaded out of the 6. How does that work for you? So we need to find half. We found half of 1/3. Now we know that with multiplication, and it doesn't matter what order that you multiply in. If you did 1/2 times 1/3 or 1/3 times 1/2, because of the commutative property, it doesn't matter. You're going to get the same answer, right? All right, so we partitioned the rectangle horizontally, and then we partitioned it vertically, and we shaded in one of them, and one of the, so when we broke this rectangle up into thirds, we partitioned it or broke it up into 3 parts. We shaded one of them, and then we labeled it 1/3. So what fraction of the treats did Jan send to school? Well, we have to now partition it. We partitioned it in half, and we showed it by coloring in half, right? So when we split this into 2 equal parts, because we had to cut it in half, cut the whole into half, and shade in only one of them. All right. So again, now I have 2 different size shaded units, right? All right. So the fraction of the pan of treats that Jan sent to school was 1/6 of the whole pan. So she sent in 1/6 of a whole pan. All right. So 1/3 times 1/2 is 1/6. So she started with 1/3 of a pan of Rice Krispie treats. That's what she started with. She just started with this section of Rice Krispie treats. So they partitioned it, and they cut away these Rice Krispie treats, and they're gone. This was the only thing was left. So of what was left, she cut it in half, and the half is what we're dealing with. Does that make sense? So when you count up the sections, there are now 6 sections. So it's 1/6. All right. Now, Jan has 1/3 of a pan of Rice Krispie treats. That's what she had last time. What if she sends in 1/4 of the treats to school? What fraction does she send to school? So remember, the problem, 1/3 times 1/4, because it's a piece of a piece. That's what we're doing right now. It's a piece. We're going to take a piece of the piece. We know this is quite easy, right? That is not hard. But the big idea from this lesson is, can we model and show the number sense? What are we doing? Like, what does this look like? What does this represent? So here we go. Here is 1/3 again. We're going to break it into thirds. And I'm going to shade in my 1/3 because that is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with this part because this part's gone. Those Rice Krispies are gone. So now, all I have left are these Rice Krispie treats. And she wants to send in 1/4 to school. So I have to, so essentially, remember this is multiplication. I'm going to break this into, or partition into 4 equal parts. But I'm only going to send in one of the fourths that I just created. So what part of my tape diagram is double shaded? This part right here. So I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces. I've now cut it into 12 pieces. Now, technically these are gone, but let's pretend those were just like those little sectioners that were little holder spots. And when maybe they just took a spatula and scooped out the Rice Krispie treats. So those little sections are still there. So the model shows we just drew the rectangle fraction model to show 1/4 of 1/3, right? We're taking 1/4 of the third. So does the order of the factors affect the size of the product? No, it doesn't when we multiply whole numbers or even fractions. That means that 1/4 of 1/3 is the same as 1/3 of 1/4. So it doesn't matter. 1/4 of a third is the same as 1/3 of a fourth because of the commutative property. It would work out the same way. Now, so when you're taking something, you're taking 1/3 of or 1/2 of, it just depends on how the problem is stated. But because of the commutative property, it doesn't matter if we would have gone 1/4 over here and 1/3 here, we would have still ended up with 1/12. Okay. All right, this we're going to pretend is our application problem for today. Okay. A sales lot is filled with vehicles for sale. So used cars, a car dealership, if you will. So 1/3 of the vehicles are pickup trucks. 1/3 of the trucks are white. What fraction of the trucks are white? Okay, so this is not complicated. Remember, go back to the focus of what this lesson is all about. The focus of this lesson is multiplying a unit fraction by a unit fraction, right? So 1/3 of a third, but I know you could do that in 2 seconds, but that's not the big idea of the lesson. The big idea of the lesson is, can you draw a rectangular fraction model to represent the problem? So, right, can you show me how to solve this? Come back in a minute and show me how you solved it. All right, so 1/3 times 1/3. So I partitioned this side up into thirds, colored in my 1/3. Then I took 1/3 of the third. Now I had to cut it into thirds as well. And I'm only focused on 1/3 of what I just cut. I'm not worried about 2/3. I'm worried about one of the thirds. And one of the thirds is equal to 1/9. 1/3 times 1/3 is 1/9. All right, so let's take a look really quick at the problem set, and then you can get started. So it says solve, and it says draw a rectangular fraction model to show your thinking. Then write a multiplication sentence. So a multiplication sentence, right? So this is the big idea. write the multiplication sentence and solve it is basically checking your work. Okay, the first one has been done for you. So half of 1/4 pan of brownies is equal to what? So here's your rectangular fraction model. They cut it in half and shaded it in. Then they took and partitioned it into fours. And right here is they're only worried about one of the fours that were shaded in. One of the fours that was shaded in. All right. So you're going to use this idea down here. Then, of course, you have to write a multiplication sentence. So you have to have your multiplication sentence. So half of 1/3 pan of brownies, 1/4 of 1/3 pan of brownies. The big idea, can you draw that rectangular fraction model? 1/4 of 1/4, 1/2 of 1/6. Now, this one, draw a rectangular fraction model of 3 copies of 1/4. What does 3 copies of 1/4 look like again? Or 3 times 1/4 becomes what? When I look at this, I think 3 copies of 1/4. And then it says compare multiplying a number by 3 and by 1/3. So what does a model look like with 3 times 1/4? So personally, when I look at that, I look at 3 copies of 1/4, compare it to 1/3 times 1/4. That's all you have to do is compare the two, draw it out. Then we have if 1/2 of Ela's workspace is covered in paper. So half of her workspace is covered in paper. 1/3 of the paper is covered in yellow sticky notes. Sounds like my desk. What fraction of Ela's workspace is covered in yellow sticky notes? Draw a picture to support your answer. So that means draw out that rectangular fraction model. That's a perfect way to explain something. A marching band is rehearsing in rectangular formation. Oh, interesting. Draw it out. 1/5 of the marching band members play percussion instruments. Half of the percussionists play the snare drum. What fraction of all the band members play the snare drum? So draw it out, and I always would include my numerical sentence. Always, 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 just because it's a way of checking your work to make sure make sure your diagram looks, or your rectangular fraction model matches your numerical sentence. So what's the big idea of this lesson? Multiplying unit fractions, right? Maria is designing a bedspread for her grandson's new bedroom. 2/3 of the bedspread is covered in race cars. So wait a minute. We just upped our game here. Instead of 1/3, it's 2/3. So when you go to draw your rectangular fraction model, how many of those thirds are now going to be colored in? 2 of the thirds, right? And the rest is striped. Okay, so 2/3 of the bedspread is covered in race cars, and the rest is striped. 1/4 of the stripes are red. What fraction of the bedspread is covered in red stripes? This one, multiply like you normally would. Use your numerical multiplication sentence, and then use that to make sure that your rectangular fraction model matches your answer. That is a great way to go about that. Okay, I think you're ready. I don't think this is going to be too difficult. I think you'll be able to do really well. Good luck.